I have to consolidate about a month's worth of work into those 10 days. This is the non-glamorous side that you don't often see on social media. The bigger the business, the heavier the founder energy taxes. So I've just literally arrived back in the UK. It is bloody freezing. I'm here for about 10 days or so, something like that. And in that time, I need to do an insane amount of work. So what is really hard sometimes is friends, family, even my employees don't understand the amount of work or things you need to get through in such a condensed period of time. And 10 days in the UK now, I have to essentially probably consolidate about a month's worth of work into those 10 days. So it's really intense, you know, from a business perspective and a personal perspective. What I've done, and the reason I've come to the UK is really to close out the year with the UK team, with some clients over here, set our business strategy for 2026, catch up with friends, catch up with family. And that is not easy to do in such a condensed period of time because the UK business has its own UK clients, my own team, and it has its own decision-making systems, processes which are separate to the business I run in the UAE. So what's kind of interesting to acknowledge is I went through this exact same process over the last week or two while I was in Dubai. So I spent the last week or two in Dubai running around, seeing clients, catching up with people, trying to tackle a lot of personal admin, and it was really, really intense. So by the time I left Dubai yesterday, I was absolutely exhausted. And then you walk into a new jurisdiction, a new country. So I'll come back to the UK and the process almost repeats itself and you're already drained, you're already tired as a founder. And this is the non-glamorous side that you don't often see on social media that I kind of want to talk about today. So it's not a holiday, you know, it's compression. It's mentally heavy, it's operationally intense, it's identity shifting from kind of one region to another, depending on the team, the business you're dealing with. And it exposes the fact that if you've built actual systems that work, or is the dependency just on you? And that cost can be really heavy. You know, growth across different regions isn't as glamorous as it looks like from the outside. You know, you see these Instagram posts, you see people putting stuff out there, but it's hard, it's tough, especially if you're running a proper business, and it's mentally heavy, it's operationally intense, and it's also identity shaping. You know, from one region to the next, you sometimes need to evolve your identity depending on what you're walking into in that other jurisdiction. And what it does, which I find really interesting, and especially over the last couple of years as I've had to make adjustments to my own businesses, is it exposes whether you've built real systems in place, you have the right people in the right seats, or is the business just depending on you? And there's no hiding from that. Today, when I look ahead and look at my diary, there's a number of things I need to address that have been kind of outstanding that I can only really address in person. You know, there's strategic decisions that need to be made, but also there's the emotional presence that I have to have with my team, with my clients. And when you're already run down, tired, you know, you've just flew in from another country, it's difficult. And you're not just working, but you've got to inject that energy into your team, into your clients. You know, you can't turn up and half-arse it. Each region needs a reset when you arrive there. And then when I go back to Dubai in 10 days or so time, you know, it will be the same again. But thankfully we're heading into the Christmas period, so things might be a little bit easier. But the truth is, you know, you have to show up as a founder. You know, you've got to show up. You have to stabilize the business. You have to realign your team, the objectives. You almost have to re-anchor the business. And that takes a lot of time, a lot of energy, and it has its own challenges, you know, operating between the two countries. And kind of what I want to talk about is something which I like to call the founder energy tax. And this is a killer foundation principle for the founder game, my consultancy. And it's a concept we kind of talk about with some of the individuals, a mentor, a coach. You know, every time you enter a region, you absorb unresolved problems. You are firefighting. You're trying to put additional systems, processes in place to solve the problems that have happened while you've been away in, say, another country working on another business. You have to make decisions which sadly a lot of other people avoid, involve sometimes some really challenging conversations, and you have to carry all that emotional weight. No one's going to do that for you. So even when you have a good team, good teams drift without your presence in the business. And I see that personally, you know, within my own business. And that's nobody's fault. You know, you're there as a founder, as a leader, and you've got to inject that energy. You've got to resolve those issues. Your responsibility is to carry the emotional weight. No one can do that for you. And I think the key thing I really want to kind of nail down is the bigger of businesses, from my experience and from my experience with working with a lot of founders and mentoring over the years, and even my own mentors myself, is that the bigger the business, the heavier the founder energy tax is. We try and paint a bit of a picture for you, right? So I arrived back in the UK, and the first thing I do is almost like a systems test, right? And this is where the education almost comes in, because the way I want to frame it is, when I travel or work in different jurisdictions, it exposes the truth. There's no hiding from it. So you either have the right systems, processes in place, or you don't, and things fall apart. Every trip I go on, whether it's Dubai, the UK, running in Europe over summer, it reveals key things about the way my business is operating, about the people I'm dealing with, about my team, about my clients, and you can discover decision bottlenecks, weak ownership of tasks and responsibilities, poor documentation, things like when SOPs should be tighter, stricter, because things have fallen through the cracks, and also a lack of standards. And sadly, as a founder, what you'll find is you care the most about the business. No one's going to care about the business as much as you, and that's nobody's fault. You can't expect someone who doesn't own the business to have the same amount of care or attention to details maybe you do, but standards naturally will drop. And there's some practical principles which I try and almost develop with the founders that I coach, the founders that I mentor, that hopefully helps them stabilize businesses, especially if they are working across multiple jurisdictions. So if things only work when you're there, that's a major problem. And that has been a problem I've faced in the past a few years ago. And I spent a lot of time, nearly 2 years, restructuring my business to put things in place so I have an actual business. Because if a business doesn't run without you, you don't have a business. You've got a job. So international scale and running businesses across multiple jurisdictions just magnifies the weaknesses. And you need to obviously resolve them as quick as you can. And that takes time, that takes learning, that takes mentorship in some cases. But travel really is a massive stress test to your businesses and even your emotional resilience to a degree, because it takes its toll, and it can be a huge distraction, as well as being highly rewarding, of course. But one kind of key principle, this is the principle I build into my consultancy, the founder game, with kind of the people in my community, is distance doesn't break a business. Weak structure does. And what I mean by that is, if you don't have structure, discipline in the business, those processes, those systems, so the business can run effectively without you, your business won't break, right? But you have to install that into the business to be able to obviously scale, international or not. So one thing I'd like to share with the founders that I work alongside is, what are my coping mechanisms to dealing with this? How do I operate between different countries? Because it's funny, I get messages on Instagram, I get asked by friends, clients, they're like, Dan, how would you have time to run the different businesses, move between the UK and Dubai predominantly, deal with different teams? Some people, their perception of me online is that it doesn't look like I do much, because you just see the glamorous side of social media. When realistically, you're slogging it out, doing 16-hour days, working weekends. And that's the reality, being a founder. And anyone who thinks life is different is under some sort of illusion, unless they have truly started to exit the business, which is a completely different story or part of their career or journey. So to give you some kind of practical framework, and this is where I try and really give value to the people I work alongside, before leaving a region. So before I left Dubai a day or so ago, I had some very, very clear priorities of what I needed to accomplish when I got back to the UK. Specific meetings I had to have with individuals in my team, specific meetings I had to have with key clients in person, much better in person than over Zoom, Teams, whatever. I needed to have named owners and responsibilities for certain individuals. So when I come back, things run like clockwork. There had to be non-negotiable standards with the way I was going to operate. I had to be really strict on where my time was going to go over these next 10 days, because sadly, there's people I would love to catch up with, friends, for example, that I just won't simply have the time to do. These decisions need to be clarified. A plan needs to be in place way before I get to the country I'm traveling to. So in this case, the UK. And if it's not locked down before I leave, it becomes absolute chaos when I arrive into the new region. When I first arrived back in the UK, like I said, nearly 24 hours ago, It's almost like there's a arrival reset. But I get to my house in the UK, and as you can imagine, some things aren't working right. So a great example is couldn't even get my car out of the garage because the electric to the garage had cut. I was trying to fix that. 30 minutes late to the office. Not great on the first day back into the business, but these things happen. So you kind of go through that reset period in the first 24 hours, and I try and do that quite dramatically now. So I don't cut myself any slack. I'm in the office on the first day. I'm back, and what I do in those first 24, 48 hours is I observe. I meet with certain members in the team. I listen to what they've been saying, or their thoughts, views on what's been going on over the last couple of months since I've been gone. You don't react emotionally. That's one of the worst things you can do as a founder. You just need to take in the information and really actively listen to what your team, your clients are telling you. And after that initial kind of observation period, what I can start to do is understand kind of what's broke, what slowed down and isn't working as well as it could have done, what is relying too heavily maybe on me, and then what I need to do is get to the root causes of problems and fix them permanently, not the symptoms. And that's something I really try and embed into my team in the UK. I always am trying to drill down to what caused a problem if something has fell through the net, so to speak, or the ball's been dropped somewhere. And it's not about pointing the finger at anybody in the team. It's about understanding where in the process something fell down and then putting a process, a system in place so that can't happen again. The other framework almost that I speak to founders about is there needs to be a permanent fix rule within the business. So no temporary patches. That's kind of a bugbear of mine. When someone kind of just patches up over a problem, there's a permanent fix in place. And every fire that happens, so to speak, must end in a system, a process, an SOP, or a role change even. Because if I fix the same problem twice, that's a failure on me as a business owner. And we should not have, especially if it's a significant problem, that should not happen more than once in my business, not within my team. The kind of next big framework, and again, this is a massive talking point in a lot of the coaching sessions I do, is about founder energy management. People initially have to get really good at managing their time, and we kind of do some work around what a model week should look like for founders and how to kind of make the most of their time, and also get them better at kind of delegating tasks or reassigning them or dropping stuff. But a big thing that gets overlooked initially is the way you manage your energy. And you are the scarcest resource as a founder. So you have to be so particular about where your energy is getting spent. And travel requires so much physical discipline, mental detachment. There feels sometimes like a lot of uncertainty. You don't feel like you're living anywhere, you're moving around. It can be quite unsettling. And you need to also have ruthless prioritization. So I have to turn around to people all the time and say, no, I can't take the meeting. I can't do that. I'm only in the UK for 10 days. Or when I was leaving Dubai, there's people who wanted to meet me urgently before I left. And I just simply could not put the time in to meet them because it wasn't a priority. It wasn't a needle moving task. I'd have to wait until I get back to Dubai in 10 days or so. You start to learn, that not everything deserves your attention, and you've got to get better at saying no. And that's a key principle that has took me some time to learn, but thankfully I've got a lot better at it. The next point I want to make is the personal cost and toll it takes on you as a founder. And this is stuff, people don't really talk about this as much. So I kind of wanted to flag this while I've got a bit of time to kind of chat through what I'm doing over the next few days. And being away from home or a base is quite difficult. You set up your life in a certain region. So I've got my routine, my structure, the way I live in the UAE, in Dubai, and then the same happens in the UK. But being away from home or base is really unsettling, and that constant transition is really, really hard. And to deal with that, you have to be super disciplined, because if you're not disciplined, structured, it's an absolute mess traveling between different countries and trying to run different businesses. And the funny thing is, you're wearing multiple hats all the time as a founder, right? Because you're switching between roles as a founder, as a leader in businesses, as a partner to people in maybe other businesses, or partners to even your clients, even as a parent, or as a partner in the sense of the person you're in a relationship with. And this is an invisible weight of responsibility that often gets overlooked for founders that are juggling not just one business, but especially if you're juggling multiple businesses and in different jurisdictions. And the key thing kind of I want to hit home is founders don't often burn out from the work they're doing. They burn out from carrying too much alone. And this is something that gets raised time and time again when I'm doing the coaching with the individuals in the founder game community. And it doesn't need to be that way. There is better ways to operate. So guys, just to like bring it all home, certainly not adopting the victim mentality here, but I wanted to give you the real talk, the real version of what actually goes on with the managing business internationally, because international growth isn't about freedom. It's not as glamorous as people portray. It's about a hell of a lot of responsibility, a hell of a lot of structure, really high standards. And the goal isn't to be everywhere because it's impossible. The goal is to build something that doesn't collapse when you're not there. And that is something, I've had to learn and work through over the last couple of years as we expanded the business into the UAE. This kind of leads me on to a final point, is exactly why I built the Founder Game, the consultancy that I run to help founders navigate problems like this. I'm trying to help founders build businesses that don't rely on their presence to survive, because it's hard enough building a good business, right? Most people can't do it, and most businesses fail in the first year. But to then build a business that can operate without you, that doesn't rely on your presence to function, and can at some point hopefully function a lot better without you having to be so heavily involved in the business, is the end goal. But it's very rare that founders get to there, and it's a journey. You need a certain skill set, and lessons like this hopefully can help guide people kind of along the way. So I hope you found this video useful, guys. I'm going to keep pumping out more content specifically related to how I can help founders scale, operate more effectively, get their time back, and basically have a better balance in their life. But yeah, until next time, much love, guys.